Staff Sergeant Amelia Quinn had been told by 3 different review boards that she would never qualify for elite military units. What they didn't know was that in 48 hours, General Jonathan Shepard would do something unprecedented in his 30-year career: offer her his personal weapon, the same custom pistol he'd carried through 2 wars and never let another soul touch. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the training grounds of Fort Ironwood like a shroud, obscuring the targets that dotted the landscape in perfectly measured intervals. Staff Sergeant Amelia Quinn moved through her daily routine with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned that keeping busy meant keeping the memories at bay. Her boots made soft impressions in the dew-dampened earth as she walked toward the supply depot, where she'd spend another day cataloging ammunition, cleaning weapons that belonged to other soldiers, and pretending that this was where she belonged. At 28, Amelia had the kind of quiet competence that most people overlooked. Average height, unremarkable build, with dark hair pulled back in regulation style, and brown eyes that seemed to absorb more than they revealed. Nothing about her appearance suggested the storm of frustration that churned beneath the surface, or the exceptional abilities that 3 separate military review boards had somehow failed to recognize. The supply depot stood like a concrete monument to bureaucracy, its gray walls housing thousands of weapons, millions of rounds of ammunition, and one very overqualified supply sergeant who wasn't supposed to be there. Amelia punched her access code into the keypad and stepped into the fluorescent-lit interior, breathing in the familiar scents of gun oil, metal, and the faint chemical tang of cleaning solvents. "Morning, Sergeant Quinn," called Specialist Tommy Fletcher from behind a stack of ammunition crates. At 19, Fletcher was enthusiastic about everything military-related and had developed something approaching hero worship for Amelia, though he couldn't quite articulate why. There was something about the way she handled weapons, the way she moved, that suggested capabilities beyond her current assignment. "Morning, Fletcher. Any word on that shipment from Aberdeen?" Amelia's voice carried the slight rasp that came from years of shouting orders on training ranges, back when she'd been allowed to do more than count bullets. "Should be here by 1400, Sergeant. The manifest shows the new M17 pistols for the qualifying officers." Fletcher paused, watching Amelia's expression carefully. He'd noticed how she always seemed particularly interested when new firearms arrived, though she never said why. Amelia nodded and moved to her desk, a metal affair that had seen better decades, positioned in the corner where she could monitor the entire depot while maintaining some semblance of privacy. The morning reports awaited her attention: inventory discrepancies, maintenance schedules, requisition forms that required her signature to authorize weapons for soldiers who were allowed to do the job she'd trained for her entire adult life. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she sat, responsible for maintaining and distributing the tools of precision marksmanship, while the soldiers who received those tools possessed a fraction of her knowledge about their proper employment. But that's what happened when you were told you'd never qualify often enough. Eventually, the system found a place where your skills could be buried under paperwork and forgotten. The first rejection had come during her initial attempt to join the Special Operations community 5 years earlier. Captain Morrison, a thin man with cold eyes and a clipboard full of predetermined conclusions, had delivered the verdict with bureaucratic efficiency. "Sergeant Quinn, while your marksmanship scores are adequate, the review board has determined that you lack the psychological profile necessary for special operations work. Your temperament suggests you'd be better suited for support roles." Adequate. The word had stung more than outright failure would have. Amelia's scores hadn't been adequate. They'd been exceptional. Perfect scores on the marksmanship portion, near perfect on tactical knowledge, outstanding on physical fitness. But somehow, the psychological evaluation had painted her as unsuitable for the very career she'd spent years preparing for. The second rejection had come 2 years later, when she'd applied for the Army Marksmanship Unit. This time, the reasoning had been different, but equally devastating. Major Henderson had been more apologetic, but no less final in his assessment. Sergeant Quinn, your technical knowledge is impressive, and your shooting is certainly competent. However, the unit requires individuals who can perform under extreme pressure, and the evaluation suggests you might not respond appropriately in high-stress situations. The third and final rejection had occurred just 8 months ago when she'd made one last attempt to join an elite reconnaissance unit. Colonel Patricia Vance, no relation to the Sergeant Major Patricia Vance currently stationed at Fort Ironwood, had been the most direct of all the reviewing officers. Sergeant Quinn, I'm going to be honest with you. You have all the technical qualifications on paper, but there's something missing. Call it instinct, call it that indefinable quality that separates good soldiers from great ones. You're simply not elite material. Not elite material. The phrase had become a constant refrain in Amelia's mind, playing on endless repeat during the long hours she spent managing inventory and watching other soldiers receive the opportunities she'd been denied. The worst part wasn't the rejection itself. It was the growing suspicion that the system had made up its mind about her before she'd even entered the room. So here she was, at Fort Ironwood's supply depot, using skills that had taken years to develop to organize equipment for soldiers who would never know that their supply sergeant could outshoot most of them blindfolded. The military had a place for everyone, the saying went, but sometimes that place felt more like a storage closet than a position of purpose. The morning hours passed in their usual rhythm of routine tasks and quiet frustration. Amelia processed requisitions, updated inventory databases, and supervised Fletcher's enthusiastic but occasionally misguided attempts to organize the small arms collection. The work was necessary, even important in its way, but it felt like using a precision instrument to hammer nails. Around 10:30 hours, the familiar sound of boots on concrete announced the arrival of Sergeant Major Patricia Vance, making her weekly inspection of the supply depot. Vance was old-school military, tough, fair, and possessed of the kind of institutional knowledge that made her opinion carry weight throughout Fort Ironwood. She'd been a combat arms soldier for 22 years before moving into logistics, and she had a reputation for recognizing talent wherever it might be hiding. "Mornin', Sergeant Quinn. How we lookin' this week?" Vance's voice carried the authority of someone who'd earned her rank through competence rather than politics. "All green, Sergeant Major. Inventory matches manifest, maintenance is current, and security protocols are being followed." Amelia's response was crisp and professional, the kind of report that indicated a well-run operation. Vance nodded approvingly and began her walkthrough of the depot, checking serial numbers against databases, examining storage conditions, and asking the kinds of detailed questions that separated thorough inspections from mere formalities. She paused at a rack of newly arrived sniper rifles, running her experienced eye over their condition and configuration. "These came in yesterday," Amelia offered, noting Vance's interest. M110 semi-automatic sniper systems, fresh from the depot, clean, properly preserved, and ready for issue. "You know these systems well?" Vance asked, though something in her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Yes, Sergeant Major, I'm familiar with the platform." "Familiar how? Through logistics training or practical experience?"
The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that both women understood. Amelia could give the safe answer, the one that kept her past buried and her current situation unchanged. Or she could tell the truth, though truth had served her poorly in previous evaluations. "Practical experience, Sergeant Major. I used the M110's predecessor during my previous assignments." Vance's eyebrows raised slightly. Like most senior non-commissioned officers, she'd learned to read between the lines of military careers, and something about Amelia's background had always seemed inconsistent with her current assignment. A supply sergeant with practical sniper experience was like finding a master chef working as a dishwasher. Possible, but requiring explanation. Previous assignments. And those would be? "Classified, Sergeant Major. but I can say I served in reconnaissance rules that required precision marksmanship. Amelia's voice remained steady, but internal alarms were sounding. These conversations never led anywhere good. Vance studied Amelia for a long moment, her experienced eye taking in details that most people missed. The way the younger woman stood, the unconscious competence with which she'd handled the rifle during her explanation, the careful precision of her language when discussing classified matters. It all painted a picture of someone whose current assignment didn't match their capabilities. Sergeant Quinn, in my experience, soldiers with reconnaissance backgrounds and precision marksmanship training don't usually end up running supply depots. What's the story there? And there it was, the question that Amelia had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. The moment when she'd have to explain how someone with her qualifications had ended up buried in logistics, managing other people's weapons instead of employing her own skills in service of her country's interests. The story that would, in 48 hours, lead General Jonathan Shepard to make a decision that would challenge everything the military thought it knew about identifying and utilizing exceptional talent. But for now, standing in a supply depot surrounded by weapons she wasn't allowed to use professionally, Amelia Quinn prepared to tell Sergeant Major Vance why the system had decided she wasn't good enough, and why she'd learned to accept that judgment, even when every fiber of her being knew it was wrong. The morning mist had burned off outside, revealing the training ranges where other soldiers were preparing for the kinds of missions Amelia had been told she'd never be qualified to attempt. Soon, very soon, that assessment would be tested in ways that no one at Fort Ironwood could have predicted. But the system's failures in recognizing talent were about to encounter an obstacle they hadn't anticipated. A general who measured capability by results rather than reports, and who carried a personal weapon that had never failed him in 3 decades of service. The same weapon he would, in less than 2 days, place in the hands of a supply sergeant who had been written off by everyone who mattered. Everyone except the soldiers whose lives would depend on her extraordinary abilities. Abilities that exist in the quiet spaces between official recognition and operational reality, waiting for someone with the authority and insight to finally see what had been hidden in plain sight all along.
Amelia took a breath, weighing her words carefully. Sergeant Major Vance wasn't known for idle curiosity, and her questions suggested she'd already noticed inconsistencies in Amelia's file that others had overlooked. The truth was complicated, messy, and had led to nothing but disappointment in the past. But Vance's direct gaze demanded honesty, and after years of careful deflection, Amelia found herself surprisingly ready to provide it. Sergeant Major, I've applied for special operations assignments 3 times in the past 5 years. Each time I've been told I don't meet the standards, despite scoring at the top of every technical evaluation. The review boards have consistently concluded that I lack the necessary psychological profile or that indefinable quality that makes someone elite material. Vance's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested she'd heard similar stories before. The military's talent identification system, while generally effective, occasionally produced blind spots that buried exceptional soldiers in inappropriate assignments. The trick was distinguishing between soldiers who genuinely belonged in support roles and those who'd been misassigned due to evaluation errors or bureaucratic oversights. "What kind of scores are we talking about?" Vance asked, though her tone indicated she suspected the answer would be impressive. "Perfect marksmanship scores on every platform I've been tested on. Expert ratings in tactical planning, field craft, and mission analysis. Top physical fitness scores in my age group." Amelia paused, then added quietly, "The psychological evaluations are where things consistently go wrong." Vance nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. The military psychological screening process, while necessary for identifying soldiers unsuitable for high-stress assignments, occasionally produced false negatives, capable soldiers who didn't fit the expected personality profiles but possessed the actual skills required for success.
It was a systemic problem that cost the military talented personnel and left exceptional soldiers in positions that underutilized their abilities. And your current assignment reflects those evaluation results rather than your demonstrated capabilities, Vance observed, making it a statement rather than a question. Yes, Sergeant Major, I've been deemed suitable for logistics and support roles, despite my background in reconnaissance and precision shooting. Amelia's voice carried the weight of accumulated frustration, though she maintained her professional demeanor. Fletcher, who had been listening to this exchange while pretending to organize ammunition boxes, couldn't contain his surprise. Sergeant Quinn, you never mentioned you were a sniper. Because I'm not, Amelia replied with careful precision. According to my official classification, I'm a supply sergeant. My previous experience is considered irrelevant to my current duties. Vance studied Amelia with the kind of attention that made younger soldiers uncomfortable, but which Amelia met steadily. After 22 years in the military, Vance had developed instincts about people that rarely proved wrong, and everything about Amelia suggested capabilities that extended far beyond inventory management and requisition processing. Sergeant Quinn, walk me through a typical day in your previous assignment, the reconnaissance work you mentioned. Amelia hesitated, not because she didn't want to answer, but because discussing classified operations required careful navigation of security protocols. However, she could provide general information about her duties without compromising operational security. My team was responsible for long-range surveillance and target identification in contested areas. I served as the primary marksman, which required maintaining overwatch positions for extended periods while providing precision fire support when necessary. The work demanded patience, technical knowledge of ballistics and environmental factors, and the ability to make critical decisions under extreme pressure. And you were effective in that role? Vance prompted, though the question was somewhat rhetorical given Amelia's current situation. My team never failed a mission during my 18 months with the unit. Our success rate was 100%, and we never lost a team member to enemy action. Amelia's voice carried quiet pride, the first emotion she'd allowed to surface during the conversation. Fletcher, who had been listening to this exchange while pretending to organize ammunition boxes, couldn't contain his surprise. Sergeant Quinn, you never mentioned you were a sniper. Because I'm not, Amelia replied with careful precision. According to my official classification, I'm a supply sergeant. My previous experience is considered irrelevant to my current duties. Vance studied Amelia with the kind of attention that made younger soldiers uncomfortable, but which Amelia met steadily. After 22 years in the military, Vance had developed instincts about people that rarely proved wrong, and everything about Amelia suggested capabilities that extended far beyond inventory management and requisition processing. Sergeant Quinn, walk me through a typical day in your previous assignment, the reconnaissance work you mentioned. Amelia hesitated, not because she didn't want to answer, but because discussing classified operations required careful navigation of security protocols. However, she could provide general information about her duties without compromising operational security. My team was responsible for long-range surveillance and target identification in contested areas. I served as the primary marksman, which required maintaining overwatch positions for extended periods while providing precision fire support when necessary. The work demanded patience, technical knowledge of ballistics and environmental factors, and the ability to make critical decisions under extreme pressure. And you were effective in that role? Vance prompted, though the question was somewhat rhetorical given Amelia's current situation. My team never failed a mission during my 18 months with the unit. Our success rate was 100%, and we never lost a team member to enemy action. Amelia's voice carried quiet pride, the first emotion she'd allowed to surface during the conversation.
So what happened? Vance asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. How does someone with that record end up processing supply requisitions? The unit was disbanded due to budget constraints, and when I applied for transfer to similar assignments, the psychological evaluations became roadblocks. Each review board interpreted my personality profile as unsuitable for high-stress operations, despite evidence to the contrary from my actual performance. Vance had encountered this problem before.
evaluation systems that prioritize theoretical psychological profiles over demonstrated performance results. It was a bureaucratic failure that occasionally buried exceptional talent in inappropriate assignments, wasting both individual potential and military resources. What specifically do these evaluations say about you? Vance pressed, understanding that the details might reveal systemic problems rather than individual deficiencies. Amelia's expression tightened slightly. The psychological reports had become sources of professional embarrassment, collections of clinical language that painted her as fundamentally unsuited for the work she'd already proven capable of performing. The evaluations consistently describe me as introverted, preferring individual work over team environments. They suggest I lack the aggressive personality traits associated with successful special operations personnel. One report specifically stated that I appeared too thoughtful and methodical for rapid decision-making under combat stress. Vance almost laughed at the absurdity. The traits described sounded exactly like those possessed by the most effective precision shooters she'd encountered during her combat years. Introversion was often an asset for soldiers who spent long periods in isolated positions. Thoughtful, methodical decision-making was essential for complex operations where mistakes proved fatal. The evaluation seemed to have misidentified strengths as weaknesses. Sergeant Quinn, in your professional opinion, were those evaluations accurate? Vance asked, curious to hear how Amelia viewed her own capabilities. In my professional opinion, Sergeant Major, those evaluations reflected the biases of evaluators who had predetermined ideas about what special operations personnel should look like, rather than actual assessment of my capabilities. Amelia's response was measured, but carried an edge of long-suppressed frustration. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Douglas Reed, Fort Ironwood's training supervisor, who entered the depot with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested official business. Reed was competent, but conventional, the type of officer who followed established procedures without questioning their effectiveness. Sergeant Major Vance, I need to coordinate weapons for tomorrow's qualification exercise. We're expecting a VIP observation, so everything needs to be perfect. Reed's attention focused on the logistics of the visit rather than the conversation he'd interrupted. What kind of VIP? Vance inquired, though she suspected she already knew the answer. High-ranking officials occasionally visited Fort Ironwood to observe training exercises, usually as part of broader assessments of military readiness and capability. General Jonathan Shepard is conducting an inspection tour of training facilities. He'll be observing qualification exercises and meeting with key personnel. Reed turned to Amelia, suddenly remembering that she was responsible for weapons coordination. Sergeant Quinn, I'll need your best firearms prepared for demonstration. The general has a reputation for attention to detail. Amelia nodded professionally, though something flickered in her expression that Vance noticed but Reed missed entirely. Certainly, Captain. What specific platforms will be required?
Standard qualification course, M17 pistols, M4 rifles, and if possible, I'd like to include some precision shooting demonstrations. The general apparently has extensive experience with marksmanship, so we want to showcase our capabilities appropriately. Vance watched Amelia's reaction to the mention of precision shooting, noting the slight tension that suggested personal interest beyond professional duty. An idea was beginning to form, one that might finally provide the opportunity Amelia needed to demonstrate that the evaluation system had failed her, rather than the reverse. Captain Reed, Vance interjected, who will be conducting the precision shooting demonstration? Master Sergeant Jake Sullivan from the Marksmanship Training Unit. He's qualified on all our precision platforms and has excellent presentation skills for VIP visits. Vance nodded, filing the information for later consideration. Sullivan was competent, but his skills were pedagogical rather than operational. He could teach marksmanship effectively, but he'd never employed those skills in combat situations where lives depended on precision under pressure. After Reed departed to coordinate other aspects of the general's visit, Vance remained in the depot, her conversation with Amelia taking on new significance. General Shepard's reputation included genuine expertise in combat marksmanship, earned through 2 combat deployments where he'd personally employed precision weapons in operational situations. Unlike many senior officers who possessed theoretical knowledge, Shepard understood the practical requirements of exceptional shooting from first-hand experience. Sergeant Quinn, Vance said thoughtfully, tomorrow's demonstration might present interesting opportunities for someone with your background. Amelia understood the implication, but had learned to be skeptical of opportunities that promised to showcase her abilities. Too many similar situations had led to disappointment when the system found reasons to dismiss or minimize her performance. Sergeant Major, I've learned that opportunities to demonstrate capabilities outside my assigned role typically don't lead to positive outcomes. The system has made its assessment of my potential, and challenging that assessment rarely produces desired results. Vance studied the younger woman, recognizing the defensive posture of someone who'd been disappointed too often by a system that should have recognized and utilized her talents. But she also detected something else, a resilience that had kept Amelia functioning effectively despite years of professional frustration. Sometimes, Vance said quietly, the right senior officer can see things that evaluation boards miss. Tomorrow might be one of those times. As the day progressed, Amelia returned to her routine duties while mulling over the conversation with Vance. The supply depot felt smaller somehow, more confining after discussing her previous life in operational units. But she'd learned to compartmentalize disappointment and focus on present responsibilities rather than dwelling on missed opportunities. Fletcher, however, couldn't stop thinking about what he'd learned. The sergeant he'd worked beside for 8 months, who'd patiently taught him proper weapons handling and maintenance procedures, possessed a background that transformed his understanding of her quiet competence. Suddenly, her methodical approach to everything, her encyclopedic knowledge of weapon systems, and her unconscious professionalism made complete sense. The ordinary world of Fort Ironwood's supply depot would continue for one more day. Tomorrow, when General Jonathan Shepard arrived to observe qualification exercises, the careful equilibrium that kept exceptional talent buried in routine assignments would encounter forces that might finally recognize what had been hidden in plain sight for too long. But for now, Amelia Quinn continued managing inventory and processing requisitions, maintaining the weapons that other soldiers would employ in roles she'd been told she'd never qualify to fill, waiting for an opportunity that experience had taught her would likely never come.
The morning of General Jonathan Shepard's visit arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made every sound carry further and every detail appear sharper. Fort Ironwood had been transformed overnight from a routine training facility into a showcase of military precision, with every surface cleaned, every uniform pressed, and every piece of equipment arranged with parade ground perfection. Amelia arrived at the supply depot 2 hours earlier than usual, understanding that VIP visits created logistical demands that couldn't be satisfied through normal operating procedures. The weapons requested for demonstration had been meticulously prepared. M17 pistols with fresh barrels and precisely calibrated sights, M4 rifles zeroed to perfection, and a selection of precision firearms that represented the current state of military marksmanship technology. Fletcher bounded into the depot with the nervous energy of a soldier about to meet his first general officer. Sergeant Quinn, everything's set up at the range. Captain Reed wants the weapons transported in 30 minutes, and Master Sergeant Sullivan is already conducting pre-demonstration checks. Sergeant Quinn, Amelia nodded, making final inspections of the firearms that would represent Fort Ironwood's capabilities to a senior officer whose opinion could influence policy and resource allocation across multiple installations. Each weapon was a precision instrument, maintained to standards that exceeded normal operational requirements, ready to demonstrate the marriage of technology and human skill that defined modern military marksmanship technology. Fletcher, help me load this into the transport cases, and remember, when we get to the range, we are observers unless specifically asked to participate. This is Master Sergeant Sullivan's show. The weapons transport to the range proceeded smoothly, with Amelia and Fletcher setting up the weapons display under Sullivan's supervision.
Master Sergeant Jake Sullivan was everything a VIP demonstration required: articulate, confident, and possessed of the kind of technical knowledge that impressed civilian officials and military personnel unfamiliar with precision shooting. His marksmanship credentials were solid, if unremarkable, and his presentation skills had been honed through years of conducting demonstrations for various audiences. "Sergeant Quinn," Sullivan said as they arranged the weapons, "I appreciate the condition of these firearms. Everything is exactly as requested, and the preparation is obviously professional." Amelia accepted the compliment with appropriate military courtesy, though she couldn't help noticing small details that Sullivan had missed. The M17 pistol's grip had been adjusted for Sullivan's hand size, but the sight picture would be slightly off for shooters with different physical characteristics. The precision rifle's scope had been zeroed for standard atmospheric conditions, but the morning's weather suggested environmental factors that would affect bullet trajectory in ways that hadn't been compensated. At 0900 hours precisely, a convoy of vehicles arrived at the range, led by the staff car carrying General Jonathan Shepard. Even from a distance, Amelia could see that the general carried himself with the kind of confident competence that distinguished officers who'd earned their rank through operational success rather than administrative achievement. General Shepard emerged from his vehicle and was immediately greeted by Colonel Benjamin Ward, his aide, and Captain Reed, who would coordinate the demonstration. At 52, Shepard possessed the lean build and alert eyes of someone who'd maintained physical fitness and tactical awareness despite years in increasingly senior positions. His uniform displayed the ribbons and badges of someone who'd served in combat roles before assuming command responsibilities. "General Shepard, welcome to Fort Ironwood," Captain Reed began, launching into the prepared briefing that covered training statistics, facility capabilities, and the day's demonstration schedule. "We've arranged displays of our standard qualification courses, culminating in precision shooting demonstrations that showcase our advanced marksmanship capabilities." Shepard listened to the briefing with the polite attention that VIP visits required, but Amelia noticed that his eyes were already scanning the range setup, evaluating details with the kind of professional interest that suggested personal familiarity with precision shooting. Unlike many senior officers who observed demonstrations as administrative requirements, Shepard appeared genuinely interested in the technical aspects of what he was seeing. The morning progressed through standard qualification exercises with predictable efficiency. Soldiers demonstrated competence with M17 pistols and M4 rifles, achieving scores that reflected adequate training and maintenance of basic military skills. General Shepard observed each demonstration with appropriate attention, asking occasional questions that revealed extensive knowledge of weapon systems and training methodologies.
"General," Captain Reed announced as the standard exercises concluded, "we'd like to conclude with a precision shooting demonstration conducted by Master Sergeant Sullivan, one of our most qualified marksmanship instructors." Sullivan stepped forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to conducting demonstrations for senior officials. His presentation was polished and technically accurate, covering the fundamentals of precision shooting while demonstrating competent marksmanship at ranges up to 300 meters. The performance was exactly what such demonstrations typically provided: solid, professional, and entirely unremarkable. General Shepard watched Sullivan's demonstration with the same polite attention he'd given the earlier exercises, but Amelia detected something in his expression that suggested mild disappointment. The general's questions became more specific, probing technical details that Sullivan answered competently, but without the depth of knowledge that came from extensive operational experience. "Master Sergeant," Shepard inquired, "what's the maximum effective range you've achieved with this platform under combat conditions?" Sullivan's hesitation was barely perceptible, but Amelia caught it immediately. "Sir, I've successfully engaged targets out to 400 meters during training exercises, though my primary experience has been in instructional rather than operational contexts." The answer was honest and appropriate, but it revealed the limitation that Amelia had recognized earlier. Sullivan was an instructor whose knowledge was pedagogical rather than practical, competent within the bounds of classroom and range environments, but lacking the operational experience that distinguished theoretical knowledge from combat-tested capability. General Shepard nodded politely and continued observing, but something in his demeanor suggested that the demonstration wasn't providing the insights he'd hoped to gain. After 28 years in the military, he'd developed instincts about people and capabilities that rarely proved wrong, and something about the current demonstration felt incomplete. It was during this moment of mild dissatisfaction that General Shepard's attention was drawn to a detail that would change everything. While Sullivan continued his presentation, the general's peripheral vision caught movement near the weapons display, where a soldier was making subtle adjustments to one of the precision rifles. The soldier's movements were economical and precise, suggesting familiarity with the weapon system that went beyond basic maintenance knowledge. More importantly, the adjustments being made were technical modifications that indicated understanding of environmental factors affecting long-range accuracy. Modifications that Master Sergeant Sullivan had overlooked in his demonstration setup. General Shepard's interest was immediately piqued. In his experience, soldiers who made those kinds of adjustments without being asked possessed practical knowledge that couldn't be learned from manuals or classroom instruction. The adjustments suggested operational experience with precision shooting under variable conditions, exactly the kind of knowledge that was missing from Sullivan's otherwise competent presentation. "Excuse me," General Shepard said, interrupting Sullivan's demonstration and walking toward the weapons display. "Soldier, what adjustments are you making to that rifle?" Amelia looked up, suddenly aware that the general's attention had focused on her. The moment she'd been unconsciously dreading for years had arrived. Senior officer scrutiny that could lead anywhere from routine acknowledgement to career-ending embarrassment. But the general's expression suggested genuine professional curiosity rather than criticism. "Sir, I was correcting for atmospheric conditions that will affect bullet trajectory at extended ranges. The current barometric pressure and temperature differential requires scope adjustments that weren't factored into the initial setup."
General Shepard studied Amelia more closely, noting details that most officers would have missed. The confidence with which she'd made the technical explanation, the precision of her terminology, and the unconscious competence evident in her handling of the weapon system all suggested capabilities that extended beyond routine supply duties. "And you know this how?" Shepard inquired, his tone carrying curiosity rather than challenge. "Personal experience with precision shooting under variable environmental conditions, sir. The current setup would result in accuracy degradation at ranges beyond 200 meters. Colonel Ward, who had been listening to this exchange, stepped closer with his tablet ready. Something about the conversation had caught his attention, suggesting that routine VIP visit was about to become something more significant. General Shepard's expression sharpened with interest. In his experience, soldiers who made casual references to personal experience with precision shooting typically possessed backgrounds that warranted investigation. The confidence and technical knowledge demonstrated by this supply sergeant suggested capabilities that didn't match her current assignment. "Soldier, what's your name and current assignment?" "Staff Sergeant Amelia Quinn, sir. I'm assigned to Fort Ironwood's supply depot, responsible for weapons inventory and distribution." The disconnect between Amelia's demonstrated knowledge and her current assignment was immediately apparent to General Shepard. Supply sergeants, while essential to military operations, typically didn't possess the kind of operational expertise that Amelia had just displayed. Something didn't add up, and the general's instincts told him that this inconsistency warranted immediate attention. "Sergeant Quinn," General Shepard said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting answers, "explain to me how a supply sergeant develops expertise in precision shooting environmental compensation." And there it was. The question that would force Amelia to reveal the truth about her background, her capabilities, and the system failures that had buried her talents in administrative duties. The moment when routine VIP visit would become something that no one at Fort Ironwood had anticipated.
the inciting incident that would challenge everything the military thought it knew about identifying and utilizing exceptional talent, beginning with one general's willingness to ask questions when something didn't make sense. Standing in the morning sunlight with a precision rifle in her hands, and General Jonathan Shepard's full attention focused on her, Amelia Quinn prepared to explain why a soldier with her qualifications was processing supply requisitions instead of employing the skills that the military desperately needed.
The weight of General Shepard's question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged rifle. Around them, the demonstration had come to a complete halt as officers and enlisted personnel alike sensed that something significant was unfolding. Master Sergeant Sullivan stood frozen mid-presentation, uncertain whether to continue or defer to the general's obvious interest in the supply sergeant who had somehow become the focus of attention. Amelia felt the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied moments when her carefully constructed professional facade was about to be challenged. 3 previous review boards had asked similar questions, leading to conclusions that had shaped her current assignment. But something in General Shepard's expression suggested genuine curiosity rather than predetermined skepticism, though experience had taught her to be cautious about reading too much hope into senior officer interest. "Sir," Amelia began, her voice steady despite the internal tension, "I served 18 months with the 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion's Precision Shooter Section before the unit was disbanded due to budget restructuring. My role required long-range surveillance and precision fire support in contested environments." General Shepard's eyebrows raised slightly. The 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion had been one of the military's most effective specialized units before bureaucratic decisions had scattered its personnel across conventional assignments. He'd personally worked with reconnaissance elements during his combat deployments and understood the caliber of soldiers who earned positions in such units. 18 months with reconnaissance, Shepard repeated, processing the implications. That's not an assignment they give to soldiers with marginal capabilities. What was your operational record? Colonel Ward stepped closer, tablet ready, understanding that this conversation was moving beyond casual inquiry into territory that might require documentation. Captain Reed looked confused, clearly struggling to reconcile the supply sergeant he thought he knew with the specialized background being revealed. 100% mission success rate, sir. 47 confirmed engagements at ranges from 200 to 800 meters, with no civilian casualties and no friendly fire incidents. My team never failed to complete an assigned mission. Amelia's response was delivered with quiet pride, the kind of professional satisfaction that came from genuine achievement rather than inflated claims. Fletcher, standing near the weapons display, stared in open amazement. The sergeant who had patiently taught him proper cleaning procedures possessed a combat record that exceeded anything he had imagined possible. But the way Amelia spoke, with precise technical language and understated confidence, convinced him that she was describing real experiences rather than embellishing routine duties. General Shepard studied Amelia with increasing interest. Soldiers typically didn't accumulate records like the one she'd just described without possessing exceptional capabilities. The disconnect between her operational background and current assignment suggested either administrative error or systemic failure in talent utilization. Sergeant Quinn, if your record is as you've described, how did you end up managing supply inventory instead of continuing in operational roles? The general's tone carried no judgment, only professional curiosity about a situation that made no logical sense. This was the moment Amelia had been dreading, explaining why a soldier with her qualifications had been relegated to support duties despite demonstrated success in specialized roles. The truth was complicated, frustrating, and reflected poorly on systems that were supposed to identify and utilize military talent effectively. "Sir, when the 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion was disbanded, I applied for transfer to similar units. Each application was rejected based on psychological evaluations that concluded I lacked the personality traits necessary for special operations work." Amelia's voice remained steady,
but those listening carefully could detect the accumulated frustration of years spent defending her capabilities against theoretical assessments. Psychological evaluations, General Shepard repeated slowly. In his experience, psychological screening was necessary for identifying soldiers unsuitable for high-stress assignments, but he'd also seen cases where evaluation systems failed to recognize unconventional but effective personality types. What specifically did these evaluations conclude? Amelia glanced at Colonel Ward, whose tablet was presumably recording this conversation for official purposes. The psychological reports had become sources of professional embarrassment, documents that painted her as fundamentally unsuited for work she'd already proven capable of performing at exceptional levels. The evaluations consistently described me as too introverted for team-based operations, lacking the aggressive personality traits associated with successful special operations personnel, and too methodical in my decision-making for rapid response situations. Each phrase carried the weight of clinical language that had been used to justify closing doors on her career progression.
General Shepard's expression shifted subtly, and those who knew him well would have recognized the look that appeared when he encountered bureaucratic decisions that contradicted operational reality. The traits described sounded exactly like those possessed by the most effective precision shooters he'd worked with during his combat years. Sergeant Quinn, in your professional assessment, were those personality traits detrimental to your performance in reconnaissance operations? The question cut directly to the heart of the matter, asking Amelia to evaluate the system that had evaluated her. It was a dangerous territory for enlisted personnel, discussing senior officer decisions, but General Shepard's tone suggested he wanted honest assessment rather than diplomatic deflection. No, sir. Those traits were assets that contributed to mission success. Extended surveillance requires patience and comfort with solitude. Methodical decision-making prevents mistakes that compromise operations. The evaluations seemed to mistake professional strengths for psychological weaknesses. Master Sergeant Sullivan, who had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement, finally found his voice. General, if I may, Sergeant Quinn's technical knowledge of precision shooting appears to exceed anything I've encountered in instructional contexts. Her understanding suggests extensive practical experience. Shepard turned his attention back to the rifle that had started this conversation, noting the adjustments Amelia had made with unconscious competence. Sergeant Quinn, explain the modifications you made to this weapon system. Amelia stepped to the rifle, her hands moving with the kind of automatic precision that indicated muscle memory developed through extensive practice. Sir, the current atmospheric conditions, barometric pressure 29.85 inches, temperature 52 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity 68%, will cause bullet trajectory to differ from standard zero settings. I've adjusted the scope to compensate for these environmental factors at ranges beyond 300 meters. And you calculated these compensations how? Mental ballistic computation based on ammunition specifications, environmental measurements, and practical experience with this ammunition type under similar conditions. Amelia's response was delivered matter-of-factly, as if such calculations were routine rather than complex technical processes that challenged most military personnel. Colonel Ward looked up from his tablet with an expression of surprise. General, the kind of mental ballistic computation she's describing typically requires specialized training and extensive practice to perform accurately under field conditions. General Shepard nodded, understanding beginning to dawn. He was looking at a soldier who possessed exactly the kind of capabilities the military desperately needed, buried in administrative duties because evaluation systems had failed to recognize operational talent. The situation represented everything wrong with bureaucratic processes that prioritized theoretical assessments over demonstrated performance. Sergeant Quinn, the general said, finally, I'd like to see a demonstration of these capabilities you've described. Are you willing to show me what you can do with that rifle? It was the moment Amelia had been hoping for and dreading in equal measure.
An opportunity to prove that 3 review boards had been wrong, that her capabilities exceeded her current assignment, that the system had failed her rather than the reverse. But also a chance for public failure that would validate every negative evaluation she'd received. Looking at General Shepard's expectant expression, surrounded by officers and enlisted personnel who had suddenly discovered that their supply sergeant possessed a background none of them had suspected, Amelia understood that her answer would determine whether she spent the rest of her career managing inventory or finally got the chance to prove what she was truly capable of accomplishing. The first revelation had established that she possessed exceptional abilities. The next phase would determine whether those abilities would finally be recognized and utilized, or whether another senior officer would find reasons to dismiss capabilities that didn't fit conventional expectations. But for the first time in years, Amelia saw something in a senior officer's expression that suggested genuine interest in what she could actually do, rather than predetermined conclusions about what she should be allowed to attempt.
The question hung in the air with the weight of years of suppressed potential. General Shepard's offer to demonstrate her capabilities represented everything Amelia had been denied since her reconnaissance unit disbanded. The opportunity to prove that her skills matched her record, that the psychological evaluations had been systematically wrong, and that the military had been wasting exceptional talent on administrative duties. But accepting the challenge carried enormous risks. Public failure would validate every negative assessment she'd received, confirming the judgment that she lacked the indefinable qualities necessary for elite military roles. Success, conversely, would raise uncomfortable questions about why someone with her capabilities had been buried in supply management for years. "Sir," Amelia replied carefully, "I'm willing to demonstrate my capabilities, but I should note that my current assignment doesn't include authorization for precision shooting exercises. I wouldn't want to exceed my authority without proper clearance." General Shepard's expression suggested appreciation for Amelia's adherence to military protocol, even when offered opportunities that most soldiers would accept without hesitation. The response demonstrated exactly the kind of thoughtful professionalism that psychological evaluators had somehow interpreted as unsuitable for special operations work. "Sergeant Quinn, I'm authorizing the demonstration under my authority as visiting senior officer. Any responsibility for exceeding normal assignment parameters falls on me, not you." The general's voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that others would be held accountable for implementing. Colonel Ward stepped forward, tablet ready to document what was clearly becoming an official proceeding rather than casual conversation. "General, what parameters do you want established for this demonstration?" Shepard considered the question while studying the range facilities available at Fort Ironwood. The standard qualification course extended to 300 meters, adequate for routine marksmanship training, but insufficient for evaluating the kind of capabilities Amelia had described. However, the range's topography suggested possibilities for longer engagements if proper safety protocols were established. "Colonel, I want to see precision shooting at ranges that will test real capability, not basic qualification standards. Can we establish safe firing positions for engagements beyond the standard course limitations?" Captain Reed, who had been silently observing this exchange with growing amazement, cleared his throat nervously. "General, our standard safety protocols are designed for 300-meter maximum engagement distances. Extending beyond those parameters would require additional safety measures and range clearance that might take considerable time to coordinate." "How much time?" Shepard inquired, his tone indicating that bureaucratic delays would not be acceptable. "Possibly several hours, sir, depending on coordination requirements with range control and safety personnel." General Shepard's expression shifted to the kind of controlled impatience that senior officers displayed when operational requirements conflicted with administrative procedures. He'd seen too many opportunities lost to bureaucratic processes that prioritized paperwork over practical results. "Captain Reed, I appreciate your concern for proper procedures, but I'm not willing to wait several hours to evaluate capabilities that might prove strategically important. What can we accomplish within existing safety parameters?" Master Sergeant Sullivan, who had been quietly observing this conversation, stepped forward with a suggestion.
General, we could establish challenging shot sequences within the existing range parameters. Multiple targets at maximum distance, time constraints, variable environmental conditions. It wouldn't test extreme range capability, but it would demonstrate precision under pressure. Shepard nodded approvingly. Sullivan might lack operational experience, but his instructional background provided useful insights into testing methodologies that could evaluate capability within available constraints. Sergeant Quinn, I'm authorizing the demonstration under my authority as visiting senior officer. I want to see what Sergeant Quinn can actually accomplish. Fletcher, who had been following this conversation with increasing excitement, couldn't contain himself any longer. Sergeant Quinn, this is incredible. I had no idea you could do anything like this. Amelia gave Fletcher a slight smile, the first genuine expression of warmth she had displayed since the demonstration began. Fletcher, there are a lot of things about people's backgrounds that don't show up in routine duty assignments. Sometimes capabilities exist in places where they're not expected.
As Sullivan began coordinating the demonstration setup, General Shepard pulled Colonel Ward aside for a private conversation. Ward understood that the general's interest in this situation extended beyond casual curiosity about an individual soldier's capabilities. Colonel, what we're witnessing represents a systemic problem with how we identify and utilize military talent, Shepard said quietly. If Sergeant Quinn possesses the capabilities she's described, then the evaluation processes that assigned her to supply duties have wasted exceptional resources. Ward nodded, understanding the broader implications. Sir, should I begin documenting this situation for formal review of personnel assignment procedures? Absolutely. But first, I want to see whether her capabilities match her claims. If she can deliver the kind of performance she's described, then we have a much larger problem than one misassigned soldier. The demonstration setup required 30 minutes of coordination, during which Amelia remained near the weapons display, methodically checking equipment and calculating environmental factors with the kind of automatic precision that indicated extensive practical experience. Her preparations were thorough and professional, suggesting someone who understood that public demonstrations carried consequences that extended beyond immediate performance. Sergeant Major Patricia Vance arrived during the setup phase, having heard through the military's informal communication network that something unusual was occurring at the range. She'd been hoping for exactly this kind of opportunity since her conversation with Amelia in the supply depot, understanding that exceptional talent needed the right senior officer's attention to be properly recognized and utilized. Shepard appreciated the senior non-commissioned officer's input, understanding that experienced sergeant majors possessed insights into personnel capabilities that officers sometimes missed. Sergeant Major, what's your assessment of Sergeant Quinn's potential for advanced assignments? Sir, in my professional opinion, Sergeant Quinn possesses capabilities that are being systematically underutilized in her current role. Her technical knowledge, attention to detail, and professional demeanor suggest someone who could succeed in any assignment requiring precision and reliability. The endorsement carried weight, coming from a senior non-commissioned officer whose judgment had been proven over 22 years of military service. But Shepard understood that assessments, regardless of their source, needed to be validated through actual performance. Master Sergeant Sullivan, the general called, what's our status on demonstration preparation? Ready to proceed, sir. We've established 5 targets at ranges from 200 to 300 meters with varying sizes and environmental challenges. The sequence will test precision, adaptability, and performance under time pressure. Shepard turned to Amelia, who was conducting final equipment checks with the kind of methodical thoroughness that suggested both extensive training and operational experience. Her preparations were thorough and professional, suggesting someone who understood that public demonstrations carried consequences that extended beyond immediate performance. Sergeant Major, the general called, what's our status on demonstration preparation? Ready to proceed, sir. We've established 5 targets at ranges from 200 to 300 meters with varying sizes and environmental challenges. The sequence will test precision, adaptability, and performance under time pressure.
Shepard turned to Amelia, who was conducting final equipment checks with the kind of methodical thoroughness that suggested both extensive training and operational experience. Her preparations were thorough and professional, suggesting someone who understood that public demonstrations carried consequences that extended beyond immediate performance. "Sergeant Quinn," the general said, as he indicated that she could proceed with the demonstration whenever she was ready. Amelia approached the firing line with the calm confidence of someone who had prepared for this moment throughout her entire military career, even when it seemed like the opportunity would never come. The challenge had been issued, the stage was set, and in the next few minutes, everyone present would discover whether the military had been systematically overlooking exceptional talent or whether Amelia Quinn would become another example of capabilities that promised more than they could deliver. But as she settled into her shooting position, with years of frustration and suppressed potential focusing into this single opportunity, Amelia knew that she was finally getting the chance to prove what she'd always known to be true, that sometimes the most exceptional soldiers are the ones the system overlooks.
The autumn wind shifted slightly as Amelia approached the firing line, carrying the scent of dried leaves and the faint smell of cordite from earlier training exercises. She moved with the deliberate precision of someone who understood that every action was being evaluated, every gesture analyzed for signs of competence or weakness. The weight of accumulated expectations, both her own and those of the growing audience, settled around her like a familiar burden. General Shepard positioned himself at the observation point with Colonel Ward and the other officers, his experienced eye taking in details that would escape casual observers. The way Amelia carried herself, the unconscious confidence with which she handled the rifle, the methodical approach to equipment preparation, all suggested someone whose capabilities extended beyond routine military training. "First target is positioned at 200 meters, Master Sergeant Sullivan announced, his voice carrying across the range with professional clarity. "Standard military silhouette, challenging but achievable for qualified marksmen. Wind conditions are variable, coming from the northeast at 8 to 12 miles per hour. Amelia settled into her shooting position with movements that seemed automatic. Muscle memory developed through thousands of hours of practice. Her body alignment was textbook perfect, but more importantly, it was natural, the kind of positioning that indicated extensive practical experience rather than classroom instruction. Fletcher watched from his position near the equipment display, barely breathing as he witnessed the transformation of the supply sergeant he thought he knew into something approaching military legend. The way Amelia moved, the confidence in her preparations, suggested capabilities that existed far beyond anything he had imagined during their months of working together. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Through her rifle scope, Amelia could see the target with crystal clarity, but she wasn't looking at the target yet. First came the environmental analysis that separated precision shooters from casual marksmen. Wind patterns, atmospheric conditions, light angles, and the dozens of variables that affected bullet trajectory over extended distances. Her breathing settled into the rhythm that had carried her through 47 successful engagements during her reconnaissance service. Slow, controlled, with each breath calculated to provide the stability necessary for precision shooting under pressure. The techniques were so ingrained that she barely registered the conscious decisions involved in their execution. "Take your time, Sergeant Quinn," General Shepard called, though his tone suggested confidence rather than encouragement. The comment revealed that Shepard understood precision shooting required patience and methodical preparation. Unlike officers who expected immediate results, he appreciated that exceptional marksmanship demanded time for proper environmental analysis and ballistic computation. Amelia made subtle adjustments to her scope settings, compensations for wind drift and atmospheric conditions that were barely perceptible to observers, but would prove critical for accuracy at extended ranges. Her calculations were performed mentally, complex ballistic mathematics that most soldiers required computers to process accurately.
Colonel Ward watched through binoculars, noting the professional competence that characterized every aspect of Amelia's preparation. General, her preparation methodology appears to exceed anything I've observed in conventional marksmanship training. The attention to environmental details suggests extensive practical experience. I'm beginning to understand that we may have seriously underestimated Sergeant Quinn's capabilities, Shepard replied quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who was recognizing a significant institutional failure. The first shot rang out across the range with the distinctive crack of a precision rifle, followed immediately by the metallic ping of bullets striking target. Through his spotting scope, Master Sergeant Sullivan could see the impact point clearly, dead center of the target's vital zone, a shot that would have been immediately fatal in operational conditions. Perfect center hit, Sullivan announced, though his voice carried a note of surprise that suggested the accuracy exceeded his expectations. Meter neutralized with single-shot precision. Amelia cycled the bolt with practiced efficiency, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round while maintaining her shooting position. The movement was fluid and automatic, suggesting thousands of repetitions that had burned the manual of arms into permanent muscle memory. Second target, 250 meters, smaller profile. Wind conditions remain variable, with crosswind components that will challenge accuracy. General Shepard studied Amelia's reaction to the increased difficulty, noting that she showed no signs of concern or hesitation. Instead, she made additional scope adjustments with the same methodical precision that had characterized her first shot preparation, adapting to the new conditions without apparent effort.
The second shot followed the same pattern: careful preparation, environmental analysis, precise execution. The bullet struck the smaller target with the same devastating accuracy, proving that the first shot hadn't been fortunate coincidence, but rather the product of genuine skill applied with professional competence. "Another center hit," Sullivan reported, his voice now carrying unmistakable amazement. "Perfect shot placement despite increased range and reduced target size." Captain Reed, who had been observing the demonstration with growing astonishment, turned to Colonel Ward with an expression of bewilderment. "Colonel, I've worked with Sergeant Quinn for months and had no indication she possessed these capabilities. How does someone with this level of skill end up in supply management?" Ward's expression suggested he was asking himself the same question. The demonstration was revealing capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about personnel assignment and talent utilization within military organizations. "Third target," Sullivan announced, 300 meters maximum range. Combat-sized silhouette partially concealed behind cover. This represents the kind of challenging shot that separates qualified marksmen from exceptional precision shooters. Amelia's scope adjustments for the maximum range shot were more extensive, requiring compensation for bullet drop, wind drift, and atmospheric effects that became increasingly significant at extended distances. Her calculations took longer, reflecting the increased complexity of ballistic computation required for accuracy at the limits of the range's capabilities. Sergeant Major Vance watched the proceedings with satisfaction, understanding that her instincts about Amelia's buried talents were being validated in the most dramatic fashion possible. Years of experience had taught her to recognize exceptional soldiers, regardless of their current assignments, and she'd known from their first conversation that Amelia possessed capabilities that extended far beyond supply management. The third shot was the most challenging yet, requiring precision that would test the limits of both equipment and human capability. Amelia's preparation was correspondingly thorough, involving multiple scope adjustments and environmental readings that reflected the professional methodology she'd developed during her reconnaissance service. When the shot finally came, it was accompanied by the same distinctive crack and metallic impact that had characterized the previous engagements. Through his spotting scope, Sullivan could see the bullet impact precisely where it needed to be, center mass of the partially concealed target, a shot that would have ended the engagement with decisive effectiveness. "Direct hit, center mass," Sullivan announced, his voice now carrying undisguised admiration. "Perfect shot placement despite maximum range and target concealment. That's some of the finest precision shooting I've ever witnessed." General Shepard lowered his binoculars and studied Amelia,
who was conducting post-shot equipment checks with the same methodical professionalism that had characterized every aspect of her performance. The demonstration had proven that her claimed capabilities weren't exaggerated. If anything, they appeared to have been understated. "Sergeant Quinn," the general called, "outstanding marksmanship. Your performance validates everything you've described about your operational background, but I have one more challenge for you if you're willing to attempt it." Amelia looked up from her rifle, her expression calm but alert. The demonstration had proven her basic capabilities, but she sensed that General Shepard had something more demanding in mind, a test that would push beyond routine precision shooting into territory that would truly distinguish exceptional capability from merely competent performance. "I'm ready for additional challenges, sir." Shepard's expression suggested that the next phase of the demonstration would test capabilities that existed at the very edge of human achievement, the kind of shooting that separated good soldiers from legends, whose abilities became the stuff of military folklore. The crowd of observers had grown throughout the demonstration, as word spread through Fort Ironwood that something extraordinary was occurring at the range. Officers and enlisted personnel alike had gathered to witness precision shooting that exceeded anything in their previous experience. But as General Shepard prepared to issue his final challenge, everyone present understood that they were about to witness something that would fundamentally change their understanding of what individual soldiers could accomplish when exceptional natural ability was combined with proper training and operational experience. The demonstration had proven that Amelia Quinn possessed genuine capabilities. The next phase would determine whether those capabilities represented merely outstanding marksmanship or something approaching military legend.
General Shepard walked toward the firing line with the deliberate pace of someone who had made a decision that would test the absolute limits of what he'd just witnessed. The 3 successful shots had proven that Amelia possessed exceptional marksmanship skills, but what he had in mind would push beyond routine precision shooting into territory that few soldiers ever attempted, let alone mastered. "Sergeant Quinn," the general said, his voice carrying across the range with unmistakable authority, "I want to see something that will truly test the capabilities you've described. Master Sergeant Sullivan, is it possible to establish a moving target scenario within our current safety parameters?" Sullivan's eyebrows raised in surprise. Moving targets represented exponentially increased difficulty, requiring shooters to calculate not only environmental factors, but also target velocity, trajectory prediction, and timing that challenged even experienced marksmen. "Sir, we have mechanical target systems that can simulate movement patterns, but the complexity increases significantly. Establish the most challenging moving target scenario you can safely manage. I want to see precision shooting that goes beyond static target engagement." Colonel Ward stepped closer to the general, understanding that the demonstration was escalating beyond routine marksmanship evaluation into something that would test capabilities existing at the very edge of human achievement. "General, are you certain you want to establish this level of challenge? The difficulty factor increases exponentially with moving targets." Shepard's expression suggested complete confidence in his decision. "Colonel, if Sergeant Quinn possesses the operational capabilities she's described, then static target shooting represents only basic evaluation. I want to see what she can accomplish under conditions that approximate real-world operational requirements." Amelia remained at the firing line, listening to this conversation with the calm attention of someone who understood that the stakes were being raised to levels that would definitively prove or disprove her claimed abilities. Moving target engagement was among the most difficult challenges in precision shooting, requiring skills that few soldiers ever developed to operational proficiency. Fletcher watched from his observation position, barely able to process what was unfolding. The supply sergeant who had patiently taught him equipment maintenance procedures was about to attempt shooting that challenged the capabilities of the military's most elite marksmen. But the way Amelia waited, calm and prepared, suggested she viewed the challenge as difficult but achievable, rather than impossible. "Target system activated," Sullivan announced after several minutes of coordination with range technicians. "Mechanical target moving left to right at variable speeds, maximum velocity approximately 15 miles per hour, range 280 meters.
The target will be visible for approximately 8 seconds during each pass, requiring rapid acquisition and precision engagement. General Shepard studied Amelia's reaction to these parameters, noting that she showed no signs of concern or hesitation. Instead, she began making scope adjustments with the same methodical precision that had characterized her static target engagements, adapting her equipment for the increased complexity of moving target engagement. "Sergeant Quinn," the general said, "this challenge goes beyond anything required for routine marksmanship qualification. Are you confident in your ability to successfully engage a moving target under these conditions?" Amelia's response was delivered with quiet confidence that came from genuine experience rather than bravado. "Sir, during my reconnaissance service, approximately 60% of my confirmed engagements involved moving targets. The scenario you've established is challenging, but within my operational experience." The answer sent murmurs through the growing crowd of observers. Moving target engagement at operational distances represented capabilities that existed among only the most elite military shooters, skills that required extensive training and practical experience to develop to proficiency. Sergeant Major Vance felt a surge of professional satisfaction, understanding that her assessment of Amelia's buried talents was being validated in the most dramatic fashion possible. Years of experience had taught her to recognize exceptional soldiers regardless of their current assignments, and Amelia was proving to possess capabilities that exceeded even her optimistic estimates. The moving target began its first pass, a mechanical silhouette that traversed the range at variable speed designed to challenge target acquisition and tracking abilities. Through her rifle scope, Amelia followed the target's movement with smooth precision. Her tracking technique reflected extensive practice with moving target engagement. But she didn't fire during the first pass, instead using the opportunity to analyze the target pattern, velocity variations, and timing that would be critical for successful engagement. The patience demonstrated professionalism that distinguished operational shooters from range performers, the understanding that first-shot accuracy required thorough preparation even under time constraints. "She's analyzing the target pattern," Master Sergeant Sullivan observed, speaking quietly to General Shepard. "That's advanced technique that indicates extensive practical experience with moving target engagement."
During the second pass, Amelia made additional scope adjustments and continued her analysis of the target's movement characteristics. Her preparations were methodical and thorough, reflecting understanding that moving target engagement required more complex ballistic calculations than static shooting. The third pass began with the same mechanical precision, but this time, Amelia's rifle tracked the target with lethal intent. Her breathing settled into the controlled rhythm that preceded engagement, and observers could sense the transition from preparation to execution that marked the moment when precision shooting became operational reality. The shot cracked across the range with explosive authority, followed immediately by the distinctive sound of bullets striking target. The mechanical silhouette continued its traversal, but careful observers could see the impact hole that marked precise center mass placement, despite the target's movement and the complex calculations required for successful engagement. "Direct hit, center mass," Sullivan announced, his voice carrying undisguised amazement. "Perfect shot placement on a moving target at 280 meters. That represents some of the most advanced marksmanship I've ever witnessed." The crowd of observers erupted in spontaneous applause, understanding that they had just witnessed shooting that existed at the absolute pinnacle of human capability. Even soldiers with limited marksmanship experience could appreciate the extraordinary skill required for successful moving target engagement at extended range. General Shepard studied Amelia with the kind of attention usually reserved for strategic assessments that would influence policy decisions. The demonstration had proven beyond any reasonable doubt that she possessed capabilities that exceeded routine military training by enormous margins. More importantly, it had revealed that the evaluation systems responsible for personnel assignments had failed catastrophically in her case. "Sergeant Quinn," the general said, his voice carrying weight that made everyone present understand something significant was about to occur, "your demonstration has proven that you possess exceptional capabilities that have been systematically underutilized by current assignment protocols. What you've accomplished today challenges fundamental assumptions about how we identify and employ military talent."
Amelia remained at the firing line, understanding that the general's words carried implications that extended far beyond individual recognition. The demonstration had proven her capabilities, but it had also exposed institutional failures that wasted exceptional resources through inadequate evaluation processes. Sir, I appreciate the opportunity to demonstrate my abilities. Regardless of the outcome, this has been the first chance I've had in years to employ skills that represent my actual military training and experience. General Shepard's expression suggested that he was processing implications that reached far beyond individual personnel assignments. Here was a soldier whose capabilities could influence operational outcomes in ways that most military personnel never achieved, buried in administrative duties because evaluation systems had failed to recognize exceptional talent. But what happened next would surprise everyone present, including Amelia herself. General Shepard reached to his hip and drew his personal sidearm, a custom .45 caliber pistol that had accompanied him through 2 combat deployments and countless training exercises. The weapon had never left his personal possession, had never been fired by anyone other than its owner, and represented 30 years of military service condensed into 8 inches of precision-crafted steel. "Sergeant Quinn," the general said, his voice carrying ceremonial weight, "I want you to fire my personal weapon. This pistol has been with me for 15 years, through 2 wars and more training exercises than I can count. No one else has ever fired it." The offer sent shockwaves through the assembled observers. General officers didn't casually loan their personal weapons to subordinates, especially not firearms that carried the kind of symbolic and practical significance that Shepard's pistol obviously possessed. Colonel Ward stared in amazement, understanding that he was witnessing something unprecedented in his military experience. The gesture represented recognition and validation that transcended normal military protocols, acknowledgement of capabilities that warranted extraordinary measures of respect and trust. Amelia looked at the offered weapon, understanding immediately that the general's gesture represented far more than additional demonstration opportunity. This was validation of the highest order. Recognition from a senior officer whose opinion carried weight that could reshape her entire military career. "Sir, I'm honored by your confidence, but are you certain you want me to employ your personal weapon?" "Sergeant Quinn, I've never been more certain of anything in my military career. You've proven that exceptional capability deserves exceptional recognition. I want to see what you can accomplish with a weapon that represents 30 years of service and has never failed me when accuracy mattered most." As Amelia accepted the general's pistol, everyone present understood that they were witnessing something that would become military legend. The moment when buried talent finally received the recognition it had always deserved, validated by a senior officer who understood that exceptional soldiers required extraordinary measures of trust and opportunity.
The weight of General Shepard's personal pistol felt different in Amelia's hands. Not heavier than standard military sidearms, but carrying the accumulated significance of 15 years of faithful service. The custom .45 caliber weapon bore the subtle modifications that marked it as a serious shooter's tool: enhanced trigger, precision-fitted barrel, and sights that had been zeroed by someone who understood that accuracy could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Amelia examined the pistol with the same methodical attention she'd applied to every aspect of the demonstration, noting the weapon's balance, trigger characteristics, and sight picture. Her familiarity with the platform was immediately apparent, the unconscious competence that came from extensive training and operational experience with precision handguns. "Sir, this is an exceptional weapon," she said quietly, her voice carrying genuine appreciation for the craftsmanship and maintenance evident in every detail. The modifications suggest someone who understands precision shooting at the highest level. General Shepard's expression reflected quiet pride in the compliment. The pistol had been modified over years of use, each enhancement representing lessons learned through practical experience with situations where accuracy determined outcomes. It was, in every sense, a shooter's weapon rather than a ceremonial sidearm. "That pistol has never missed when it mattered," Shepard replied, his tone carrying the weight of memories that couldn't be shared in unclassified settings. "It saved my life on 3 separate occasions and has never failed to deliver precision when precision was required." Colonel Ward watched this exchange with growing amazement, understanding that he was witnessing something unprecedented in his military experience. General officers didn't casually share personal weapons, especially not firearms that carried obvious emotional and practical significance. The gesture represented trust and recognition that transcended normal military relationships. Fletcher stood near the equipment display, barely able to process what was unfolding. The supply sergeant, who had taught him proper cleaning procedures, was holding a general's personal weapon, preparing for a demonstration that would either validate her extraordinary claims or expose them as exaggerated boasts. But the way Amelia handled the pistol, with unconscious familiarity and obvious competence, suggested failure was unlikely. "What target do you want me to engage, sir?" Amelia asked, understanding that the general's offer carried expectations that needed to be precisely fulfilled. Shepard studied the range, considering challenges that would test both the weapon's capabilities and Amelia's ability to adapt to unfamiliar equipment under pressure. The pistol's characteristics differed from the rifles she'd been using, requiring different shooting techniques and ballistic considerations. "Master Sergeant Sullivan," the general called, "establish a precision pistol target at maximum effective range. I want to see what's possible when exceptional skill meets exceptional equipment." Sullivan coordinated quickly with range technicians, establishing a target array designed to challenge handgun accuracy at distances that exceeded routine qualification requirements. "Sir, targets established at 50, 75, and 100 meters. The 100-meter target represents extreme range for precision pistol shooting under any conditions." Amelia moved to the pistol firing line, her stance and grip automatically adjusting to accommodate the weapon's characteristics. Her preparations were thorough and professional, involving sight alignment checks and trigger control evaluation that demonstrated extensive experience with precision handgun shooting. The crowd of observers had grown substantially, with word spreading throughout Fort Ironwood that something extraordinary was occurring at the range. Officers and enlisted personnel alike had gathered to witness precision shooting that challenged conventional understanding of individual military capability. Sergeant Major Vance watched with satisfaction, understanding that her instincts about Amelia's buried talents were being validated in the most dramatic fashion possible. The recognition Amelia was receiving from General Shepard would reshape her career and potentially influence how the military identified and utilized exceptional talent. "First target, 50 meters. Amelia announced, settling into her shooting stance with movements that appeared automatic, her breathing controlled, sight picture precise, finger placement on the trigger reflecting extensive training in precision handgun techniques. The pistol's report was sharp and authoritative, distinctly different from the rifle she'd been using, but fired with the same confident precision. Downrange, observers could see the bullet impact exactly where it needed to be, center mass of the target, proving that her capabilities extended beyond rifle marksmanship to include exceptional handgun accuracy. "Perfect center hit," Sullivan reported, his voice carrying the amazement that characterized his observations throughout the demonstration. "Textbook precision shooting with an unfamiliar weapon." General Shepard studied Amelia's technique, noting details that confirmed his growing assessment of her exceptional capabilities. The way she handled his pistol, with unconscious competence and obvious familiarity, suggested training and experience that extended beyond routine military requirements.
"Second target, 75 meters," Amelia called, making subtle adjustments for the increased range while maintaining the same methodical approach that had characterized every aspect of her performance. Her confidence appeared unshaken by the challenge, suggesting that extreme-range handgun shooting fell within her operational experience. The second shot followed the same pattern: careful preparation, precise execution, devastating accuracy. The bullet struck the 75-meter target with the same center mass precision, proving that the first shot hadn't been fortunate coincidence, but rather the product of genuine skill applied with professional competence. "Another perfect hit," Sullivan announced, his amazement now tinged with something approaching awe. "I've never seen precision handgun shooting at this level." Captain Reed, who had been observing the demonstration with growing astonishment, turned to Colonel Ward with an expression that suggested his entire understanding of military capability was being challenged. "Colonel, what we're witnessing exceeds anything I thought possible for individual marksmanship. How does someone develop these capabilities?"
Ward's expression suggested he was asking himself similar questions. The demonstration was revealing abilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about human potential when properly trained and equipped. More importantly, it was exposing institutional failures that had buried exceptional talent in inappropriate assignments. Final target, 100 meters, Amelia announced, preparing for the shot that would test the absolute limits of precision handgun shooting under any conditions. The range exceeded what most military personnel considered achievable with sidearms, representing a challenge that few soldiers would even attempt. Her preparations for the extreme range shot were correspondingly thorough, involving sight adjustments and environmental calculations that reflected understanding of ballistic principles at their most complex application. The mathematics involved in accurate handgun shooting at 100 meters challenged even experienced marksmen. General Shepard watched these preparations with the kind of attention usually reserved for critical tactical decisions. The demonstration had already proven that Amelia possessed exceptional capabilities, but success at 100 meters with a handgun would place her among the most elite shooters in military history. The final shot required extended preparation, with Amelia making multiple sight adjustments and environmental calculations that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with handheld weapons. Her focus was absolute, excluding everything except the technical requirements for accuracy at the extreme limits of the pistol's capabilities. When the shot finally came, it was accompanied by the same sharp report that had characterized the previous engagements, but followed by a silence that seemed to stretch infinitely as observers waited for target confirmation. At 100 meters, bullet impact wasn't immediately visible, requiring spotting scope verification to determine shot placement. Master Sergeant Sullivan peered through his spotting scope, his expression shifting from concentration to amazement to something approaching disbelief. "Direct hit, center mass," he announced, his voice carrying wonder that suggested he was reporting something that challenged his understanding of what human beings could accomplish. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause that echoed across the range, understanding that they had witnessed shooting that existed at the absolute pinnacle of human capability. Even soldiers with limited marksmanship experience could appreciate the extraordinary skill required for precision handgun accuracy at 100 meters. General Shepard accepted his pistol back from Amelia, but his expression suggested that something fundamental had changed in his assessment of both her capabilities and the military systems responsible for utilizing exceptional talent. The demonstration had proven beyond any reasonable doubt that evaluation processes had failed catastrophically, burying strategic assets in administrative roles. Sergeant Quinn, the general said, his voice carrying the weight of decisions that would influence careers and potentially reshape personnel policies. "What you've accomplished today represents some of the finest marksmanship I've witnessed in 30 years of military service. More importantly, it proves that our current systems for identifying and utilizing exceptional talent are fundamentally inadequate." The moment hung in the air like smoke from the discharged rounds, everyone present understanding that they had witnessed something that would become military legend. But more significantly, they had seen the moment when buried talent finally received the recognition it deserved, validated by a senior officer whose opinion carried weight that could reshape entire careers. General Shepard's offer of his personal weapon hadn't just been a gesture of respect, it had been a test that proved Amelia Quinn possessed capabilities that the military had been systematically wasting through bureaucratic failures and inadequate evaluation processes. The climax was complete, but everyone present understood that this was actually a beginning rather than an ending. The recognition Amelia had received would ripple through military channels, challenging assumptions and potentially reforming systems that had failed to identify exceptional soldiers who deserved opportunities matching their capabilities.
The autumn afternoon had transformed from routine demonstration into something that would be discussed in military circles for years to come. As the crowd of observers began to disperse, their conversations buzzed with amazement at what they'd witnessed. But General Shepard remained at the firing line with Colonel Ward, Sergeant Major Vance, and Amelia herself, understanding that the demonstration's implications extended far beyond individual recognition.
Sergeant Quinn, the general began, his tone carrying the weight of decisions that would reshape careers and potentially influence policy at the highest levels. What we've witnessed today represents a systematic failure in how the military identifies and utilizes exceptional talent. Your capabilities have been wasted for years due to evaluation processes that clearly don't work. Colonel Ward consulted his tablet, which contained documentation of every aspect of the demonstration. The evidence was overwhelming. Perfect marksmanship at extended ranges, successful moving target engagement, and precision handgun shooting that exceeded what most military personnel thought possible. More importantly, the documentation proved that psychological evaluations had systematically failed to recognize operational capability. General, Ward said carefully, the implications of this demonstration extend beyond Sergeant Quinn's individual situation. If our evaluation systems can miss talent at this level, how many other exceptional soldiers might be similarly misassigned? The question struck at the heart of what General Shepard was beginning to understand. Amelia's case wasn't an isolated incident of bureaucratic oversight. It was evidence of institutional failures that potentially wasted exceptional resources on a systematic basis. The military's most valuable assets might be buried in administrative roles, their capabilities unknown and unutilized. Sergeant Vance stepped forward, understanding that senior non-commissioned officers played crucial roles in identifying and developing talent that evaluation systems might miss. Sir, in my experience, exceptional soldiers often don't fit standard personality profiles. The traits that make someone effective in high-stress operations, patience, methodical thinking, comfort with solitude, are often misinterpreted as psychological weaknesses. Fletcher approached the group with obvious hesitation, understanding that he was about to insert himself into a conversation involving senior leadership. But his months of working with Amelia had given him insights that might prove valuable in understanding how exceptional talent could remain hidden within routine assignments. General, if I may, I've worked with Sergeant Quinn for 8 months, and there were always signs that she possessed capabilities beyond her current assignment. The way she handled weapons, her technical knowledge, the precision with which she approached every task, it all makes sense now. Shepard studied the young specialist, appreciating that enlisted personnel often possessed insights into their colleagues' capabilities that officers might overlook. What specific signs did you observe, Specialist Fletcher? Sir, Sergeant Quinn approached everything with the kind of methodical precision that suggested extensive training. Her knowledge of weapon systems exceeded anything required for supply duties. She could field strip and reassemble complex firearms blindfolded, and her technical explanations were always more detailed than necessary for basic maintenance. The observations confirmed what General Shepard was beginning to suspect. Exceptional talent often leaked through in small ways, visible to those who worked closely with buried capabilities, but invisible to evaluation systems that relied on standardized assessments. The military might be systematically overlooking soldiers whose abilities could provide strategic advantages. Captain Reed, who had remained nearby during the post-demonstration discussion, finally found his voice. General, I've been Sergeant Quinn's supervisor for months and completely missed her operational background. How do we prevent similar oversights in the future? It was the question that would define the demonstration's legacy. Individual recognition for Amelia was important, but the broader issue involved reforming systems that could identify and utilize exceptional talent more effectively. The military's most valuable assets might be buried in administrative roles, their capabilities unknown and unutilized. Captain Reed, who had remained nearby during the post-demonstration discussion, finally found his voice. General, I've been Sergeant Quinn's supervisor for months and completely missed her operational background. How do we prevent similar oversights in the future? It was the question that would define the demonstration's legacy. Individual recognition for Amelia was important, but the broader issue involved reforming systems that could identify and utilize exceptional talent more effectively. The military's competitive advantages increasingly depended on individual capabilities that pushed the boundaries of human achievement. Captain Reed, who had remained nearby during the post-demonstration discussion, finally found his voice. "General, I've been Sergeant Quinn's supervisor for months and completely missed her operational background. How do we prevent similar oversights in the future?" It was the question that would define the demonstration's legacy. Individual recognition for Amelia was important, but the broader issue involved reforming systems that could identify and utilize exceptional talent more effectively. The military's competitive advantages increasingly depended on individual capabilities that pushed the boundaries of human achievement. Amelia had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement, understanding that her personal situation was becoming the catalyst for discussions that might influence military policy at institutional levels. The recognition she had sought for years was finally occurring, but in ways that exceeded anything she had imagined possible.
"Sir," she interjected respectfully, "if I may suggest, the problem isn't necessarily with individual evaluators. The psychological profiles used in special operations selection seem designed to identify specific personality types rather than evaluate actual capabilities. Someone might possess all the technical skills necessary for success, but be eliminated due to theoretical psychological concerns." General Shepard nodded, appreciating that Amelia's insights came from direct experience with evaluation failures. "What would you recommend for improving the selection process?" "Sir, practical evaluation under operational conditions might provide better assessment than psychological profiling alone. Someone's response to actual stress reveals more about their capabilities than theoretical personality assessments." Colonel Ward made notes on his tablet, understanding that these recommendations might influence future policy development. Sergeant Quinn raises valid points about practical evaluation methods. Her demonstration today proved capabilities that psychological assessments apparently missed completely. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Master Sergeant Sullivan, who approached the group with obvious excitement about what he'd witnessed. "General, I've been conducting marksmanship demonstrations for 15 years, and I've never seen shooting at the level Sergeant Quinn displayed today. Her capabilities exceed anything I thought possible for individual marksmanship." Sullivan's endorsement carried significant weight, coming from someone whose instructional experience provided broad perspective on military marksmanship capabilities. His amazement at Amelia's performance confirmed that the demonstration had revealed abilities that existed at the very edge of human achievement. "Master Sergeant Sullivan," General Shepard said, "in your professional opinion, how should we modify training and evaluation procedures to better identify soldiers with Sergeant Quinn's level of capability?" "Sir, I would recommend establishing practical evaluation protocols that test actual performance under challenging conditions, rather than relying solely on written assessments and personality profiles. Today's demonstration proved that exceptional capability can exist in unexpected places." General Shepard studied the group of military personnel who had witnessed something that would influence their understanding of individual capability for years to come. The demonstration had proven that exceptional talent could be systematically overlooked by evaluation processes, wasting resources and missing opportunities to employ strategic assets effectively. "Sergeant Quinn," the general said, his voice carrying the authority of someone about to make decisions that would reshape careers, "effective immediately, you're being reassigned to my personal staff for specialized operations coordination. Your current supply duties are being transferred to other personnel, and you'll be working directly with strategic planning elements that can utilize your operational capabilities." The announcement sent ripples of excitement through the assembled group, understanding that they were witnessing recognition and opportunity being extended to someone who had been denied both for years. But more significantly, they understood that institutional changes were beginning that might influence how the military identified exceptional talent. "Sir, I'm honored by your confidence and ready to serve in whatever capacity you determine most appropriate," Amelia replied, her voice steady despite the emotional impact of finally receiving the recognition she'd sought throughout her career. Colonel Ward consulted his tablet, already beginning coordination for the administrative changes required by Amelia's reassignment. "General, I'll begin processing the necessary paperwork for Sergeant Quinn's transfer and security clearance updates. Her new assignment will require access levels that match her operational background." Sergeant Major Vance felt deep satisfaction, understanding that her instincts about Amelia's
buried talents had been validated in the most dramatic fashion possible. Sir, if you're establishing new evaluation protocols, I'd like to volunteer for the working group. My experience with personnel assessment might prove valuable. As the afternoon sun began to set over Fort Ironwood, General Shepard understood that routine demonstration had become something far more significant. The recognition of Amelia Quinn's exceptional capabilities was just the beginning of reforms that might fundamentally change how the military identified and utilized its most valuable human resources. The demonstration had proven that sometimes the most exceptional soldiers are the ones the system overlooks. But it had also shown that the right senior officer, asking the right questions at the right moment, could uncover capabilities that challenged conventional understanding of what individual soldiers could accomplish. Amelia Quinn was no longer a supply sergeant whose talents were buried in administrative duties. She was a strategic asset whose capabilities would be employed in roles that matched her exceptional abilities, validated by a general who understood that exceptional soldiers deserved exceptional opportunities. The aftermath was just beginning, but everyone present understood that they had witnessed something that would influence military capability and personnel policy for years to come.
2 years after that transformative afternoon at Fort Ironwood, the ripple effects of Amelia Quinn's demonstration continued to reshape how the military identified and utilized exceptional talent. What had begun as a routine VIP visit had evolved into comprehensive reforms that influenced personnel policies across multiple service branches, proving that sometimes individual recognition could catalyze institutional change. General Shepard's personal staff had expanded to include a specialized talent identification unit, with Amelia serving as Deputy Commander for Exceptional Capabilities Assessment. Her role involved reviewing cases of potentially misassigned personnel, developing evaluation protocols that emphasized practical performance over theoretical psychological profiling, and training senior officers to recognize exceptional talent that might be buried in routine assignments. The office buzzed with activity that reflected the scope of reforms initiated by her demonstration. Computer screens displayed personnel files of soldiers whose capabilities might exceed their current assignments, statistical analyses of evaluation system failures, and proposed policy changes that would prevent exceptional talent from being systematically overlooked. Amelia, General Shepard said during their weekly briefing, using the informal address that had developed as their professional relationship evolved beyond conventional military hierarchy. The latest statistics show remarkable progress. We've identified and reassigned over 200 soldiers whose capabilities were being underutilized due to evaluation system failures. Colonel Ward, now serving as administrator for the Talent Identification Program, consulted his tablet with satisfaction. Sir, the cost-effectiveness analysis shows significant return on investment. The soldiers we've reassigned are performing at levels that justify the program's entire budget many times over. The success metrics were impressive, but represented more than statistical achievements. Each reassigned soldier represented individual potential that had been rescued from bureaucratic burial, capabilities that were now contributing to operational effectiveness in ways that benefited national security interests. Fletcher, who had been promoted to staff sergeant and now served as the program's enlisted advisor, reviewed files with the kind of attention to detail he'd learned from working with Amelia. His experience had taught him to recognize signs of buried exceptional capability, insights that proved valuable in identifying soldiers whose talents exceeded their current assignments. Ma'am, Fletcher reported, the latest batch of evaluation files includes several soldiers whose technical knowledge seems to exceed their assigned specialties. Their personnel records suggest capabilities that might warrant further assessment. Amelia reviewed the files with the methodical attention that had characterized her approach to every challenge throughout her military career. Her experience with systematic underutilization made her particularly effective at recognizing signs that indicated exceptional soldiers trapped in inappropriate assignments. Master Sergeant Sullivan had become Director of Practical Evaluation Training, developing protocols that tested actual capabilities under challenging conditions rather than relying solely on theoretical assessments. His instructional experience proved invaluable in creating evaluation methods that revealed genuine talent. Amelia, Sullivan reported during the briefing,
The new evaluation protocols are identifying exceptional capabilities at 3 times the rate of previous methods. Practical assessment under operational conditions provides much better insight into genuine ability than psychological profiling alone. The program's success had attracted attention from congressional oversight committees interested in military efficiency and resource utilization. Representatives wanted to understand how systematic failures in talent identification had been discovered and corrected, and whether similar problems existed in other government agencies. Senator Patricia Morrison, chair of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Personnel Policy, had scheduled hearings that would examine the broader implications of evaluation system failures. General Shepard, she'd written in her correspondence, "We need to understand how someone with Sergeant Quinn's capabilities could be overlooked for years, and what systemic changes are necessary to prevent similar waste of exceptional talent." The congressional interest reflected recognition that individual personnel assignments could have strategic implications when exceptional capabilities were involved. Soldiers like Amelia represented force multipliers, whose proper utilization could influence operational outcomes in ways that conventional personnel management failed to appreciate. Sergeant Major Vance, now serving as senior enlisted advisor for the program, had developed curricula that taught military leaders to recognize signs of buried exceptional talent. Her experience with personnel assessment proved valuable in reforming evaluation processes.
The key insight, Vance explained during leadership training sessions, is understanding that exceptional soldiers often don't fit standard personality profiles. The traits that make someone effective in high-stress operations, methodical thinking, comfort with solitude, preference for individual work, are sometimes misinterpreted as psychological limitations rather than operational assets. The training was being implemented across military installations, teaching officers and senior non-commissioned officers to recognize capabilities that might be hidden within routine assignments. Early results suggested that systematic talent identification could dramatically improve personnel utilization efficiency. Amelia's personal story had become a case study taught in military leadership schools, illustrating how bureaucratic systems could fail exceptional individuals and how proper senior officer attention could rescue wasted capabilities. But she remained focused on operational effectiveness rather than personal recognition. "General," she reported during strategic planning sessions, "the soldiers we've identified and reassigned are exceeding performance expectations in their new roles. We're seeing innovation and capability improvements that suggest this program is uncovering strategic assets that were previously unknown." The operational successes validated the program's fundamental premise that exceptional talent could be systematically identified and properly utilized when evaluation processes emphasized practical capability over theoretical assessments. More importantly, the successes were influencing military effectiveness in ways that justified continued investment and expansion. Captain Reed, who had supervised Amelia during her supply duties, now served as coordinator for follow-up assessment of reassigned personnel. His experience with failing to recognize exceptional talent had taught him valuable lessons about the subtle signs that indicated capabilities beyond current assignments. "Ma'am," Reed reported, "the reassigned soldiers are reporting significantly higher job satisfaction and are requesting additional challenging assignments. We're seeing retention improvements that suggest proper talent utilization influences career satisfaction." The retention statistics reflected broader implications beyond operational effectiveness. Soldiers whose capabilities were properly recognized and utilized were more likely to continue military service, reducing training costs and preserving institutional knowledge that benefited long-term readiness. International military observers had begun requesting information about the program's methodologies, understanding that talent identification challenges existed across military organizations worldwide. Several allied nations were implementing similar evaluation reforms based on lessons learned from Amelia's case. General Shepard reflected on the transformation that had occurred since that autumn afternoon when he'd noticed a supply sergeant making technical adjustments to a precision rifle. What began as curiosity about individual capability has become systematic reform that's improving military effectiveness across multiple domains. Amelia's story proves that exceptional talent can emerge from unexpected places when proper attention is applied. The program had established permanent institutional structures that would continue identifying and developing exceptional capabilities long after the current leadership moved to other assignments. Training curricula, evaluation protocols, and assessment methodologies had been embedded in military doctrine, ensuring that future generations of leaders would possess tools for recognizing buried talent. Today, soldiers throughout the military understand that exceptional capabilities might be hidden within routine assignments, waiting for recognition from leaders who possess the insight and authority to properly utilize strategic assets. Amelia Quinn's transformation from overlooked supply sergeant to strategic asset coordinator had become proof that the military's most valuable resources are often the ones that evaluation systems fail to recognize. Her legacy extends beyond individual success to encompass institutional reforms that continue identifying exceptional soldiers whose capabilities can provide strategic advantages when properly employed. The demonstration that challenged 3 psychological evaluation boards had ultimately challenged an entire system, proving that sometimes the most important military victories occur when buried talent finally receives the recognition it deserves. The general who had offered his personal weapon to a supply sergeant had discovered that exceptional soldiers often work quietly, maintaining capabilities that exist at the intersection of advanced training and extraordinary individual potential, ready for deployment when someone with sufficient insight finally notices what had been hidden in plain sight all along. And in conference rooms and training facilities across the military, leaders now understand that asking the right questions about inconsistencies in personnel assignments might uncover the next Amelia Quinn. Exceptional soldiers whose capabilities could influence operational outcomes in ways that bureaucratic systems never anticipated.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.